Welcome to Sewing with Stephanie. Today I am so excited to share with you this amazing pattern making technique that I learned while taking classes at Central St. Martin's in London. That's right, that's one of the best fashion schools in the entire world, and I'm bringing this technique straight to you. This technique is really amazing for curved seams and sculptural garments. I also really love it just as a creative exploration to get your design juices flowing and to try something new while you're sewing and pattern making. This pattern making technique only requires two materials: tissue paper and masking tape. You're gonna need a lot of it, but in order to create this fashion mummy mold that we're creating, those two ingredients are needed. Then we'll take this apart and create an amazing pattern that would have been super difficult to kind of either dream up or get exactly right using any other method. Before we get started, please hit subscribe below and click thumbs up to like this video so that other people can find my videos. Also, I would love to hear from you. Please comment below on what your latest project is and what you're working on, and maybe how you plan to use this technique. I'm sure other people would love to be inspired by your projects. In order to get started today with our really exciting pattern making technique, you really only need two things: tissue paper and masking tape. I have an entire roll of masking tape. This is about 1 inch thick. You will use the majority of the roll, and you could go maybe a little wider, but I wouldn't go much wider than the 1 inch thickness. And then I have just some old tissue paper from some gifts that I've received, and this should be fine. If you run out of tissue paper, you can always use muslin. You could probably use muslin in the first place, but I like tissue paper because it's so lightweight. So in order to start, I'm going to take my tissue paper, try to expand it, flatten it out, and I'm going to wrap it all the way up to the neck on my mannequin. Now I'm just going to use a little bit. I'm actually going to take another piece right now. It's a little tricky. This is when you need 3 hands. Take another piece of tissue paper and do the same thing on the back and just kind of overlap it. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but I do want the tissue paper to cover the shoulders of the bodice. It doesn't really matter what it's doing to the neck. And then I'm just going to take 2 pins to quickly secure it while I flatten it out. And then I'm going to start by getting my tape ready. And I'm literally just going to take the tape and press it around, flattening out the tissue paper. I promise, at the beginning it looks hard, but that's literally the only hard part about this. It gets so much easier as you go. But I'm just securing these 2 pieces of tissue paper here. Okay. And then since this is a bodice, I'm going to actually make it go a little lower to cover the waist. And then I'm going to get 1 more piece of tissue paper for the back. Okay, now I've got this black piece of tissue paper, and I'm basically going to just use it to cover the back part of the hips. It doesn't matter if it matches or not. And then use a pin to secure it while I get my tape ready. Now I've got this hot mess, which actually looks like maybe somebody would have made it on a Project Runway episode, but no. So I'm going to secure the waist, because that's the tiniest part. I'm going to make it as small as possible. And then from there, I'm going to continue to wrap this tape around, getting as tight as I can on top of my tissue paper. This is the really easy and fun part. Basically, you just go around and round and round, overlapping the tape just a little bit, and really it's kind of sucking in and getting that tissue paper as close to the mannequin as possible. That way we can use this outer shell that we're going to create of the tape to cut and design off of and to create a really cool sort of mold of the body. Before you go any further, remove the pins because you don't want to accidentally cut into them later. One more. And then just keep going with the tape. Now I like to start with the waist portion and then above bust portion. I would go back to the waist if you would like this outfit to maybe go below the waist. You can add a few more inches. So I'm gonna do that and then come back to the bust and the shoulders. I'm gonna stop there for the length and just make sure everything is really pressed down and fitted. Not too tight, obviously, but nice and fitted. And then you can cut off this extra tissue paper. Okay, then just let's finish off the shoulders by adding small bits of tape like this, making sure the tape really overlaps on both sides, front and back. Depending on your design, you might not have to go this high up on the neck, but I'm gonna do a traditional bodice style. If you decide you wanna do something one shoulder or strapless, then you don't need to do this neck portion. And then let's just finish up by doing the bust. You might need smaller pieces in order to do this. Okay, so there we have it. We have our fashion mummy, as I like to call her. Really make sure you smooth out all the edges of the tape. And then take a second look and make sure you don't see any area where the tissue paper is hanging free. Oh, one little spot right there. And then a little bit under the bust. Okay, she looks good. So one of the reasons I really love this technique is you can see it really allows you to make this sculptural mold of the body. So if you're trying to do something a little bit more avant-garde, this is a great technique to use. For example, some people like to build up the shoulders a bit more. Well, you can easily put something, maybe it's a shoulder pad or something more extreme in there and then tape on top, and all of a sudden you'll have this built up volume. You can imagine using any number of fun things that are around to build up shapes on the body. Another thing people like to do is build out the hips. So if you decide to use cardboard, which is a great idea to kind of create shapes, you can put cardboard, mold it onto the body in the way that you would like, and then follow this same procedure with tissue paper and tape on top of it, and it's gonna create those shapes that you want. So now that we have our girl all taped up and ready to go, it's time to design our top. I have a pretty thick marker here. The first thing I'm gonna mark is just for this bodice, I'm gonna mark out the neckline and the sleeves. The thing that's different using this technique versus traditional draping, where you're only doing one side of the body, is that this can be a little difficult to do for symmetrical things. So you really want to eyeball that neckline to make sure it's as close as possible. Later on, I'll design an asymmetric design so it doesn't matter as much the left to right side. So I now have an armhole neckline on both sides. Now I can have fun and design my top. So before you go in with a pen, I would suggest going in with a pencil first, because just like slashing and spreading and flat pattern making, you want to make sure that your seam lines are going through the most convex areas, so bust line, hips, and the most concave areas, i.e. waistline. Without making sure a seam is hitting those, it can be difficult to get that shape without a ruffle or a pleat or something else. And you can definitely add that in, but for the sake of this type of project, this is really less about pleats and ruffles and added fullness and more about creating sculptural lines directly with one layer of fabric. So I think I'm gonna create an asymmetrical, maybe wave kind of thing here. So that line's gonna go right through the apex. It's kind of already starting to be a really cool seam line. Maybe I'll add another one. Believe it or not, I don't have this planned ahead of time. I'm really just doing it as I go. We can have it come from the armhole, but let's bring it up from here again. Yeah, it's kind of weird, but I kind of dig that it's got this fluid sort of shape. You could imagine it being in a contrast color, it'd be interesting. Then we have to make sure we carry those seam lines. We'll have that go there, why not? And then this one will do the same thing. It'll get close and then go back off. Now I could add something else up here if I wanted. Maybe another one. This one can wrap around the body. And then get close to this seam line. That's interesting. Okay, so you can see I've created a few interesting things here. Now, the one thing I'm noting already is that I have a piece here, this center piece, and that goes all the way to the back here. We're gonna leave that for now and see what happens. If I can eliminate any seam line on the top of the shoulder, that's great. Same thing with this piece. So this side goes over the shoulder and back. Now, I'm pretty sure this is gonna need a seam line. So it's either gonna need it at the top of the shoulder or the side seam, but after we cut it apart, we can decide then. And then the same thing, so here the neckline, this one should be good. This one, oh wait, no. Oh no, it's all one piece again. Wait. Ooh. Ah, no. So this is really interesting. This is tricky. I'm gonna leave it for now so you guys can see what happens. But this piece, so say this continues to here. This piece right here, let's follow it. Goes up, across, over the inside of the shoulder, and down, and then connects to itself here. So it's almost as if instead of having a side seam and a shoulder seam, I have a seam in the front here, and the armhole is in the middle of the pattern piece. So again, we're gonna leave that for now and see what happens. Before I go any further, I wanna make sure I add some notches. Okay, so I have a ton of notches, and I have only 3 pieces, but they've created this really interesting swirl. And again, we don't exactly know if it's gonna work, but the cool part about this pattern making technique is that we can take this apart and play with it, flatten it out, and then we can go back in and decide if we wanna add seams. So just to prevent, I am actually gonna do one more thing. I'm on the shoulder, I'm just gonna make marks of where that shoulder seam and where that side seam would be. Should I decide, I can write shoulder. Should I decide that I want to add them back in later. Shoulder and side, same thing here. Okay, now we're ready for the next step, and it's to take this off our mannequin and create a paper pattern. Okay, now that we have our seam lines drawn, our notches marked, and our shoulder and side seams marked, because we're making this really cool seamed garment, we have to take this off of our mannequin. So there are a couple ways to do this, but the most important part is to stay within the seam lines that you have already sewn. So I want to make sure you can get your finger maybe right underneath that. You can feel where the tissue paper is connected to the masking tape. Get your paper scissors in there and let's cut up. Okay, and just like that, we have a side body piece. This is really amazing. You're gonna wanna cut out that armhole, and then we will play around with this shape. But let's continue to cut our pieces off the mannequin. Okay, wow, you cannot be watching this video and not think this is the coolest pattern piece you've ever seen. So we've got the neck at the top and it connects to itself. Now we obviously are gonna have a few things to figure out here when we take it to flat pattern, but I just love this because it just really helps you visualize 3D pattern making and how cool these pieces can be. So I'm gonna cut out those armholes and the neckline, and then we'll start looking at the pieces overhead. It's kind of hard to fit all of our crazy pieces, but I wanted you to see that we have 3 pieces and they're all a little wonky, but we're gonna go one by one and solve them. So left to right, we have the left armhole when you're looking at the mannequin, and that connected to the front piece here, which wraps around to the back. The bust is in here. And then we have this piece that wraps around the neck and arm and then comes back. So let's start left to right and look at these pieces. So our first one is the left side. So as expected, the left side piece is not flat. Now looking at this piece, the question is, obviously I have to relieve it at some point to make it flat. It's totally a design preference, but I like to have seams as little as possible if they're not, you know, they're not super necessary. But this is a tricky one, I can tell right off the bat. So I can easily just cut that and open that up, and that would be one tiny little seam. But I would still have this bubbling issue right here. Or I could create this side seam, open up that bubble, which will allow for the curve, and then open it up. As much as I would like to cut this, I would still have to solve this problem in order to account for the hips. And the reason, again, that I have this is because I did take the length of this down just past the waist so that we could explore and play with this. Because if I had just taken it to the waist, which would have been right there, then we would have been good, everything would have been great, all flat, cut that open, done. But we have this hip line here. So the other thing you could do, you could say, you know what, I don't mind at all, and I want to add another seam in here. So you could add a seam line right there and then turn this into 2 pieces, top and bottom, and open it up. This is what is cool about this design process. When you don't have a set way to make something and you're just being creative, it's cool to come up with different solutions. But for the sake of this side piece, I am going to take it, the side seam right here. Ah, you know what I could have done? Now I'm gonna go back. See, this is live, everybody. Okay, I'm gonna go back. Why would I do a straight seam and lose the design integrity of this cool design when I could really do a curved seam? And it doesn't even have to come from the underarm. I could do something like this that opens it up and comes right through the side, right through the apex point of that hip. And then I still kind of keep that same design integrity without chopping it off with a straight line. And you know what, we'll add a notch here for good measure. Okay. Cut it up and then pray that it's a flat piece, or basically flat. Sometimes it doesn't seem like it's flat because it's just been molded, but that part is all flat. You have to hold it down and see what it does. And that part's all flat. So we have pattern piece 1. And it's really cool, it wraps around the arm, it has a really cool side seam. Okay, let's get to the second piece. So the second one is really long. If you remember, the bust is right here, the 2 apex points. So this actually looks really flat already and wraps around over the shoulder and is flat there. So we kind of got lucky with this piece because it's actually flat. You know, we might have a little bit at the hip, but actually I don't think so. So that's pretty amazing because our second pattern piece is already flat at it as is. If it wasn't, of course, we could go ahead and adjust it and play around with some ease and some things, but we don't need to do that. Okay, third pattern piece is a doozy. I don't even know how to lay it out, but we've got the neckline. Okay, let's lay it out this way so we're looking at it straight on. We've got the neckline, and then that side seam. So the first thing we need to take care of, so actually let's start from the flat part. So this is the side seam. Now there's a little bit of fullness right here towards the apex, and maybe I didn't get that seam quite close enough to the apex as I should have. Yeah. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna open it up, we're gonna add a little ease just like you would in flat pattern making. So I'm just gonna cut straight to the apex, and then look at that, that flattens out. And then when you sew this, you still have your notch points, and you're just gonna ease that right into the other seam. But it's nice and flat now, okay? And then we continue to go around. So it looks like we have sort of the same issue as the other side, where we need to solve for the armhole in a creative manner. And just staring at it, I'm coming up with ideas. I think I'd like to do the same thing as last time with a creative side seam here. And maybe it comes waving this way. Create that notch. Let's see what happens. I think I know what this pattern piece is gonna look like, but you never really know until you open it up. Okay, oh my God, wow. Okay, so we have a little bit right here we have to take care of around the back of the shoulder. Okay, so working through this pattern piece again. It's flat here, we've opened up the ease at the apex point. It wraps around, this is the neck, this is the upper back right here. And then we've got a little bit of bump of fullness right here. And then it's smooth down here, smooth here. So we need to take care of this bump of fullness, which is essentially the same thing as that ease. We just need to make sure that, so I can't actually cut into this because that is the armhole. So I can't actually open up from that side because I have nothing that I'm kind of gathering it into. So I have to open up the ease into the seam line. I'm gonna cut in right here, cut into this piece. Maybe I didn't quite get, there we go. And I've opened up the pattern piece here as well, created that ease that will then slowly be sewn, eased up between those 2 notch points. And this is so cool, you guys. From a pattern making perspective, I've never done something like this, especially when I learned this technique. I was very calculated and pre-planned about what I was gonna design, but today for this video, I wanted it just to be more organic and natural and solve the problems that you guys are gonna have to solve when you learn this technique. And because of that, I have this really amazing pattern piece. Look how cool this is. Now, it can be a little confusing when you have to sew it up. So I would advise going piece by piece and making sure you say, okay, first, I'm just gonna connect those 2. And then I'm gonna connect these 2. And then you've got all of a sudden this one pattern piece that feels good. But before you get there, take this masking tape pattern piece and tape it down on another piece of pattern making paper if you have it. And Add in your seam allowance around the whole piece. True up those curves. Make sure you like the curves the way they are. Make sure you add those notches. Keep the ease in there so that you have a fully finished pattern piece. And in our case, we'll have 3 different pattern pieces in order to sew up and make a really awesome sculptural garment. I really hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial today because I really love doing it and it's already got my brain thinking about what I want to make next. Thank you so much for following along with me today on Sewing with Stephanie as I shared with you this amazing tutorial on how to use masking tape and tissue paper to create really sculptural and beautiful curved seam garments. It's definitely something cool and interesting and amazing to have in your arsenal. See you guys around soon. Bye.